Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to let your sports opinions fly for the main event. A 7-team elimination match to decide the District 4 3A Championship. Presented to you live by PilotPointBearcats.com. This 10-week match has been sanctioned by the University of Interscholastic League. Our celebrity referee for the District 4 3A show is none other than the daytime psychology professor, Texas high school football storyteller, North Texas insider, and DFW Inside High School Sports, the most feared member of the Texas high school mafia, the one, the only, small-town Dixie, the professor,
Showtime! From the home offices in Parker, Texas, standing in the shadow of South Fork Ranch, it is the District 4 3A Report. I am the Professor Matt Diggs. We are powered by PilotPointBearcats.com. They are an independent blog. They are not affiliated with Pilot Point ISD. And if you go to PilotPointBearcats.com, you can see old newspaper clips back when Pilot Point used to be competitive. And the fact that I can say those kind of things lets you know that they're not affiliated with Pilot Point ISD at all. We are here for another episode, the first district episode here, and a little bit of story time with Professor Diggs. I don't often listen to myself on podcasts. I'm sure many of you can barely get through the 30 minutes of having to hear my voice every week. Certainly, I don't want to hear myself say the same thing for 30 minutes, but I often do listen to the beginning and the end because our friends at the PilotPointBearcats.com mothership often infuse something in. And last week I called for 2 tickets to Paradise, and as I was listening to the outro, we didn't get the actual hook, but we got a bit of the melody of that song. And I'll be honest, I haven't heard that song in probably 20 years. It's not my musical jam and not what I listen to, but it got in my head, and it was a little bit catchy, and I've probably listened to that song 15 times in the last week. There's actually a nice version on YouTube that was filmed in 2011 or so, an acoustic version. I always like, when I hear a song, I always like to hear the acoustic version, because sometimes these songs are overproduced and you never know what you're going to get, and when you can have an acoustic version that's really good, that's when you know you have really good music. And Eddie Money does a very good acoustic version, even at that point 33 years later after recording the original version of that song. So 2 tickets to Paradise. For all I know, it is currently playing under me right now because that's what our friends at PilotPointBearcats.com do at times. And they also encourage you to like, subscribe, or comment. We're still not quite into the playoff hunt, so we're not going to ask for 2 out of 3. But I appreciate everybody doing that. I know it really helps the metrics, and apparently the metrics went off the chart last week over a certain part of the podcast, and I'll just let you see if you can figure out which part of the podcast that the metrics spike in certain areas. It's always amusing to consider that. But we're going to start out our lead story this week from the Wise County Messenger. Our good friend Austin Jackson. He is the managing editor for the Wise County Messenger. And his article this past week, I think, is very interesting from a number of perspectives. Obviously, what are you going to write about when there's a 57-0 whitewashing? And there's quite a bit of that going on this past week. I'm not sure the rundown of the statistics and what happened last week is going to be very entertaining to half of the listeners of the District 4 3A report, but I would like to alert you to this article. Very well written. Austin Jackson has a gift for writing, and the very first paragraph, or what we call the lead in journalism, the Paradise Panthers were competing against 2 teams as they opened District 4 3A Division I play with a 57-0 win over the Ponder Lions. The team in front of them and the team that was playing 26 miles down the road. So the lead of this article about Paradise pretty much references Brock and how important Brock is. And as that article continued later on Friday night, Paradise and Brock, two teams on a collision course in a District 4 3A Division One issued opening statements in their upcoming battle. Brock reeled off a blowout win of its own, thrashing Boyd 78-0. Remember who we are competing against, Koch said to his players. We prepare for Brock every week. Now, friends, I don't like that. I appreciate that. You're wanting to win district and you're wanting to be prepared, but I think you are giving Brock a little bit too much credit when you are doing this. Basically, showing that they've already got real estate in your brain, and we already saw the last 2 years that Whitesboro could not get over that Brock hump over 4 different times, and every year they got a little bit better and the games got a little bit more competitive. But that idea that Brock is the irresistible force that you are trying to defeat just to me says you're already defeated. To me, it says you're already behind 14-0 on the scoreboard when you are basically comparing your whole season around how you're going to prepare for Brock and what you're going to do for Brock. Brock is probably not viewing Paradise with the same level of importance. I'm sure beating Paradise is important for Brock, but I'm sure beating Whitesboro is important for Brock. Looking ahead at the first round of the playoffs is important for Brock. Getting back to the regional finals is important for Brock. I appreciate that Paradise has never been here, but this is kind of showing that they haven't been here, that they are putting this much impetus on needing to beat Brock, and every week we are preparing for Brock. Last year, if we're just looking at analytics, Paradise probably should have beat Brock. And when you consider everything that Paradise has coming back this year, and the kind of the graduation and the transfers with Reed Watkins that Brock is going to have, it is arguable and understandable that Paradise might be considered a favorite in this game. If you look at Dave Campbell's rankings, certainly they've got Paradise as a little bit of a favorite in their rankings. I've got Brock ranked ahead of Paradise, but Dave Campbell's has Paradise ranked ahead of Brock. But we talked about extensively last year Dave Campbell's in 3A Division 1 not always giving Brock enough respect, and certainly not giving Whitesboro last year the respect that they earned. And I think if they had a do-over, they probably would have done that again. And I think that's why we're seeing a little bit of Paradise love to a certain extent. Granted, they are 5-0, but who have they beat at the end of the day? Beating bad teams and beating teams convincingly is not necessarily the way to get there. You got to beat an important team. So for me, Brock has definitely earned the respect and earned that ability to have that ranking. And to me, this kind of article tells me it's already 14-0 Brock. And if Paradise is going to beat Brock this year, they're going to have to win by 2 or 3 scores to overcome the fact that they're already giving up 14 points in psychological real estate, given that they are so hyper-focused on Brock. I mean, Brock is the defending district champions, but to put this much impetus on it to where your article about your first district game is pretty much infused on Brock, and that's what your coaches and are directing to the media that write about you, I'm a little concerned, friends. And it's not to say that Paradise versus Brock isn't a main event, game of the week, game of the month, highlighted on every television show. We might get it twice, and it might be a game. Speaking of that, I mentioned this to the sideline crew I was on with Terry Bennett this past week on their Sideline to Sideline podcast. If a hypothetical Paradise versus Brock game happened in the playoffs, where would you play that game? We remember with Whitesboro and Brock, they had one game in Denton and they had one game at Globe Life. To me, I would think you would have to have that game in Globe Life. I mean, maybe Abilene if you wanted to be equally inconvenient, but I think that kind of alienates the DFW casual fan, so you might want to bring that closer to DFW. But Brock versus Paradise, you can think about that. Maybe you can comment on that on the whatever format you're listening to this on. Very curious where a hypothetical Brock versus Paradise playoff game would end up happening. But that's kind of our lead story today. So, because I've got 2 tickets to Paradise in my head, reading this article made me a little bit worried that I think the 2 tickets are actually to Brock and the real estate in Brock, because they're definitely in Paradise's head already. That's the immovable object that you have to try to move to define your self confidence, instead of Paradise just thinking, we got to get better every week. Brock is just one more team, and we have to overcome them. It to me shows a little bit of a lack of confidence in a way that you're putting so much emphasis on this game. We'll see if I'm right or not, but a little bit concerned about that. But looking at that Paradise versus Ponder game, not much to talk about as far as 57-0. It was 37-0 at halftime. What I've been increasingly impressed with Paradise is their defense, holding Ponder to 31 rushes and -3 yards. After that, I mean, that's some deep level math right there. That's some .1 or .009 kind of yardage. It's probably not .009. That's too many decimals. Algebra teachers would be mad. If you're an algebra teacher, as a football coach listening to this, I apologize for giving you that extra. We're not in the thousandth tenths, but we're definitely in the tenths when you're at 31 and -3 yards total, if you're averaging that out per rush. Passing yards, 118 yards for Ponder. Paradise, 394 yards on 45 rushes. Another efficient game for Austin Iglesias, 4 of 6 for 132 yards, couple touchdowns, and just pure dominance. And the dominance is really coming from the defense. And we see this with Brock versus Boyd, that they're just stopping them, 3 and out, ball back, touchdown, 3 and out, ball back, touchdown. And it's just a repeated cycle. And Paradise is continuing to trend upward. But again, the fact that they're preparing so much for Brock, and even in that article, they said every game they're preparing for Brock, and this 57-0 is symbolic of the fact that they respect them, because they're pretending every week they're preparing for Brock. What about the first round of the playoffs? Who are you going to be preparing for then? Are you just preparing for your rematch against Brock? Again, I'm belaboring the point, but I think when you put this much emphasis on that one team, you're completely overlooking the fact that you've got a really good team and you've got bigger goals. Is the goal for Paradise in 2023 to beat Brock, or to win the state championship, or to get to the state championship? I'm not sure what their goals are, but given that in this article, in our small sample size, the goal seems to be to prepare for Brock every week. What do you do after that? Is there a letdown? Let's say you beat Brock. Is there a letdown after that, or are you just preparing for the next game against Brock? Deep thoughts here from the professor. Speaking of Brock, the team that is earning their real estate in the mind of Paradise, they won a nice 78-0 game this past week. Brody Woods with a nice bounce back game, 11 of 13 for 196 yards and 3 touchdowns. 8 rushing touchdowns this week for Brock. Brody Woods had 1, Vance Guthrie 2, Brett Tutter 3, and then garbage time we had Cody Farmer and Cannon Stevens all contributing to the cause. And I think probably the most impressive stat when you are looking at it is, again, the defensive dominance from Brock against Boyd, holding them to 60 total yards for the game. It was a statement made by Brock, and it was a complete dominating performance on both sides of the ball. Even the second teams were dominant. I think there was a mission statement to be had, and there's a lot of theories floating out there in the Brock Twitter world, the DMs, about why certain things are happening, and maybe a little dissension based on who's starting here, who's starting there, have they earned their spots, maybe a little bit of regret for having this 4-game schedule without any sort of break, and maybe being too tired and too wore out and too worn down by that level of competition. Whatever the actual reasons may be, this is obviously the statement you would like to make, as that article referred to the opening statement, a completely dominant performance. And I think we're going to continue to see these dominant performances from Brock pretty much until Whitesboro and Paradise. I think the only two teams that are going to have a little bit of a different narrative to spin against them. Finally, our other game, we had Whitesboro against Pilot Point. Whitesboro winning that game 41 to 21. A little bit of inaccuracies in the max prep number, so I'm a little skeptical here. But I can say that Clay Hermes went 9 for 20, 139 yards, a couple touchdowns. Max Parker ran the ball 18 times for 107 yards. And even though Pilot Point got 21 points, the defense for Whitesboro was more dominant, I think, than the numbers might indicate. Aiden Hamlin only went 10 of 19 for 91 yards and a touchdown. Ran the ball 8 times for 34 yards. With a long of 25 with a big touchdown run. They only ran the ball 15 times for 65 yards. So just utter dominance from Whitesboro, but the score wasn't necessarily reflective of that dominance. But one thing that I'm a little bit concerned about, and I'm not going to make that big a deal about it because I admit I'm completely uninformed. And you know what sports writers like to do? We like to take a thought and go big on it, even though we're completely uninformed. So I'm going to lead by saying I am completely uninformed. But I look at these statistics for Whitesboro, and I see a quarterback by the name of Colt Fagan, a freshman from Whitesboro. Fagan name sounds familiar. 3 of 4 for 17 yards, running the ball 11 times for 38 yards and 2 touchdowns. I don't know what kind of rotation. I don't know if he was playing in the second half. I don't know if Clay got a little bit dinged up in the second half, or if for whatever reason a freshman player who's the son of a coach is now thought to be on equal footing with a senior who is incredibly talented and has been in the program for 4 years. I don't know there, but I would say that one definitely has to be careful and tread lightly in these situations, because some of the scuttlebutt around the Brock locker room has been about earning positions and whatnot, and there definitely doesn't fit well with chemistry when there's an appearance of impropriety. I think of last year in Lovejoy having 3 really good quarterbacks, and obviously when you have 3 good quarterbacks, you want to give everybody good time and try to get as many people involved, and pretty much it wrecked the locker room. The toxic nature of having a quarterback who transferred in from a couple of years ago basically beat out who was the sophomore, Hondo Franklin, and take away his junior year. Hondo Franklin is back in there as a senior right now and has led Lovejoy to their 5-0 start already. So doing very well and kind of bouncing back. But last year, a lot of internal chemistry problems there, and some have indicated maybe that's happening in Brock. Don't hear any about that in Whitesboro, but it's always a little bit of a concern. But on the other hand, if you want to take the more positive view, it is wise for coaches to get underclassmen playing time when appropriate. If you can get a freshman and sophomore in there and get them reps and get them valuable learning experiences, it definitely can pay dividends in the future when the next 3 years, since Whitesboro is definitely aiming to be relevant the next couple of years. Brock is expected to move up to 4A Division II, so this district, whatever it will look like, will be a little bit more open. I think Paradise is expected to take a step back after this year as well. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. So it definitely makes sense for Whitesboro to mix in freshmen and sophomores whenever possible to build up that foundation for the next couple of years, as Whitesboro will be aiming to keep that level of 2, 3, 4 round deep and even go a little bit further, which might be amplified by the fact that Brock may be moving up to 4A Division II, and who knows what realignment we'll have. The District 4 3A report will probably be guaranteed to look much different. We might be talking Pottsboro and Mount Vernon, and who knows how the district will end up shaking out and where they draw the line and who goes east and who goes west. But interesting statistics there with Whitesboro, to say the very least. Going into this week, we have three more games that are of note. In fact, we have Ponder, who has found that extra game. So I did not know this, but Ponder on the scoreboard has Houston St. Pius X, and they are a massive underdog to Houston St. Pius X, but getting that extra game after district starts. Very curious about that, but I like it because we were talking last week about Pilot Point and Pilot Point absconding from playing 10 games. Obviously, Ponder wants to get their 10 games in, and they didn't get to start out with the game. So, what are we going to do here in week 6? We are going to pick up a game against Houston St. Pius. I can't tell you I know much about Houston St. Pius. I do know they are a four-score computer favorite against Ponder. So far, things have been looking very good for Houston St. Pius X. They started out 0-2, losing to Second Baptist from Houston 41-0, and then Kelly Catholic 12-10. But the last 3 weeks, they've bounced back quite a bit against two pretty big-name teams. They beat the Woodlands Christian Academy 35-19. They beat Lamarck, a Houston area powerhouse, 27-13. And then they beat Dallas area's own Bishop Dunn 36-14. And Bishop Dunn this year has struggled a little bit, but certainly a very competitive team. They lost to Dallas Christian 48-0, but they did beat Eastern Hills. They beat Bishop Gorman before losing to St. Pius X, and now they'll be playing Plano Prestonwood this next week. And this game will be a home game for Ponder, so St. Pius X is going to be traveling up here, but they, beating Lamarck, beating Bishop Dunn, they have to be considered the favorite. Greg Cranville is the head coach over there at St. Pius X. He was at Wills Point up until 2020. I remember interacting with him a couple of times and doing some East Texas things out there. A very good coach and has a very good situation out there. Has a coaches show and part with Matt Malatesta, and I got started with Matt Malatesta back with the Texas Prep Extra Days, a little bit of a historical thing, and he's big into the media and certainly somebody who's very approachable. If I would have actually known, because I didn't know this game was on the schedule, but looking at some of my research, this game was on the schedule for the beginning of the year, so this one's on me. This is my bad. I didn't realize that Ponder had filled their 10th game with anything, but it's clearly on the schedule, so I just missed it. I probably could have had him on here. We could have had a good chat about this Ponder versus Houston St. Pius X game, but you have to consider that St. Pius X will be the favorite in this. In Peaster or in Ponder has really been struggling offensively. In fact, we have 3 teams in this district. Both Peaster, Pilot Point, and Ponder have either scored 65 or 66 points this season. Each of them with 4 games under their belt. So we're talking averaging 17 points a game right now, 16.5, 16.25 in that range. But all of the games expected this week are expected to be, there's not a lot to say about these. You have Paradise, who has outscored opponents 202-25, giving up 5 points a game. Just an absolutely destructive defense. Pilot Point has to go out there, and when you're talking about scores, this is just going to be score management. It's like, what is Paradise going to do to Pilot Point? Because this is Brock. Everything is Brock right now. For them. So Pilot Point will be traveling up to Paradise, and Paradise is going to be pretending it's Brock. And I think the computer over-under I'm looking at is 54. I think I'm going to take the over. I think Paradise might get up in the 60s on this one. Brock against Peaster. We know that Brock is playing at that next level, and Peaster has had some games where they've been absolutely blown out. I mean, again, it gets into the game management, but I think Brock will get 70 on Peaster. I don't know if Peaster is going to be able to score. Whitesboro versus Boyd. This is our best chance for a competitive matchup, and I don't think it's going to be competitive. We saw, last year, in the last couple of years, you can kind of calibrate with Brock and Whitesboro. Can Whitesboro go 78-0 on Boyd? I don't quite think so. Whitesboro's defense, although improving a little bit this year, does not seem to be the shutdown kind of offense or defense. And Boyd has it, even though they're 0-5, they have shown signs of life at times. So this is going to be a fascinating game. I think we'll be calibrating the Pilot Point game with this game to see potentially is Boyd a little bit closer to Pilot Point, a little bit further away. But I think Whitesboro beating Boyd even a little bit more handily than Pilot Point might not necessarily indicate that Boyd is still not potentially a favorite for this last playoff spot. Starting out with Brock and Whitesboro back-to-back, potentially starting out 0-6, I think a lot of the psyche of Boyd might be tested, because they could win. Certainly, that they've probably got one more loss coming up to Paradise, but winning 3 games after that, they could get into the playoffs at 3-7. So can they get that right mentality to do that by beating the Peaster, Ponders, and Pilot Points of the world? So I think we'll get some interesting, if anything we can get out of these 3 games this week, and I don't think we're going to get much out of the Ponder hosting Houston St. Pius X. It's going to be this Whitesboro Boyd game. I think Whitesboro, I'm going to take the under. I don't think they win by 28, but I do think that they will win convincingly in this game. Maybe a 49-24 kind of a game with Boyd scoring a little bit late because the running game is still trying to get established for Boyd, but Braden McIntyre, I think, has a good enough arm to get some points on the board for Boyd. So that's been the District 4 3A report. I'm always fascinated to know what our friends at the PilotPointBearcats.com mothership will send at the end of this as a message to me. Regionally, a couple of things to note. Jim Ned lost last week, so Jim Ned is perhaps not who we thought they were. Bushland still has some question marks there. Muleshoe is 5-0, but I think the difference between Jim Ned and Bushland right now are clearly below Paradise and Brock, and the question is, can Whitesboro get to that level to potentially get to the 3rd round again, where they would have a rematch against potentially the loser of Paradise and Brock in the 3rd round, because last year we saw Whitesboro versus Paradise in the 3rd round, and that was 2nd place Whitesboro versus 3rd place Paradise. So I would assume that the brackets would work out similarly again this year, that the 2nd place team in District 4 3A would play the 3rd place team in District 4 3A if they both make it to the regional semifinals, which this District 4 3A report correspondent, that's me, hopes for. The more District 4 3A report games we can get in the playoffs, the better. So think about that conundrum with Paradise and Brock in the playoffs. Maybe we'll get some mapping as far as what the appropriate neutral site would be. If you're going pure middle, it's looking like Springtown or Azle, but I don't think that Springtown or Azle will get a football game of this magnitude, but we'll find out. So for all of our friends at PilotPointBearcats.com and for all of our friends across the District 4 3A listening area, my name is Matt Diggs. I'm the professor. Thank you for tuning in to yet another District 4 3A report, and we'll see you down the road. Kick me out with my outro, PilotPointBearcats.com. Whoa, 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 whoa. You be Johnny. I'm gonna take you on a trip so far from here.
It's okay for macho men to show every emotion available right there, because I've cried 1,000 times, I'm gonna cry some more. But I've soared with the eagles and I've slithered with the snakes and I've been everywhere in between. And I'm gonna tell you something right now. There's one guarantee in life, and that there are no guarantees, yeah. And understand this. Yeah. Nobody likes a quitter. Nobody said life was easy, so if you get knocked down, take the standing 8 count, get back up, and fight again. And you're a macho maniac. Dig it.